Hey everyone, welcome back to the Essential NFL Podcast. I apologize for the technical issues. I'm working through this episode, doing state of the team on the teams at the top of the draft, the Titans, the Raiders, the Cardinals, and the Jets, and unfortunately got cut off partway through the Raiders bit. What it is Jackson Powers Johnson. I keep wanting his name to be Austin Powers. I guess I watched those movies growing up, so I was checking to make sure I had a misspoken there, and ended up killing the video. So anyways, I uploaded everything as the first half, and I'm going to keep going with the second. I just don't have time to edit all this stuff. And hey, yeah, if you got time to watch, hopefully you can sort through the two videos. So obviously, listen to part one if you want to know where I'm picking up from here. But we were talking Raiders offense, and talked about some of the positives with Brock Bowers and Ashton Genty and Colton Miller coming back healthy, hopefully. Getting into some of the question marks, right? And so yeah, our guy Jackson Powers Johnson, not the international man of sex and mystery Austin Powers. Yeah, Jackson Powers Johnson and DJ Glaze, two guys that I was really quite excited about seeing their second season last year. I thought that both of them showed potential as rookies and could have developed into more in their second year. Did not work out for either of them. I would say with Powers Johnson in particular, he's like the one guy I would circle in the NFL who his first game out of the gate, both of the past two seasons, he didn't look like he was in good enough shape to play a full NFL game. That was kind of a whatever his rookie year. You'll learn from that. But then when he didn't in his second year, I thought that was kind of concerning. He just looks like he's carrying too much weight for his body in that case. And, it got better as the year went on. He plays himself into shape, but, it's just not a great place to start. So hopefully he can kind of figure that out. And, I thought he was a really enjoyable player to watch once he got himself into shape as a rookie. And, hopefully we get a little bit more of that. DJ Glaze at right tackle. I mean, it just, yeah, he looked like he's going to be a swing tackle the rest of his career last year. Whereas as a rookie, I thought he'd held his own. He certainly has the size and some movement ability to play offensive tackle in the league. But he's got to get more consistent, refine things and take a step forward, and that just didn't happen last year. So this could all get turned around. Clint Kubiak went into Seattle, and they had a number of guys who kind of met that description of like they'd stagnated or something like that, and he got the very best out of them. So maybe we'll see those guys, really take a step forward. That would go a long way for this team if that were to happen. And then that does leave the left guard spot where they signed Spencer Burford from the Niners to man that slot. I think that's a spot that you are really hoping that that you can play your way out of that. So they let me make sure I get the name right here, but yeah, they drafted Trey Zune in the third round, and I think that he's got a good chance to compete for that guard spot, and it's very likely he's going to win that. As opposed to these Raiders guys who were getting coached by that regime and getting the upgrade with Clint Kubiak coming in. Spencer Burford's been playing for Kyle Shanahan his whole career, and he has been wildly inconsistent. To put a positive spin on it, honestly, I just don't think he's a very good player. It's tough to have him slated in your starting lineup. So if they can bring the rookie along, maybe you play Burford a little bit early on as our guy Trey Zune is catching up. But I don't think that's a long-term solution. So we'll see. And then getting to the receivers, you look at Trey Tucker and Jalen Naylor and Jack Besh as your starting three with Dante Thornton, as an idea as a long, lengthy receiver who didn't do much of anything last year. I think that's pretty discouraging. I think that, Trey Tucker and Jalen Naylor are for sure NFL receivers who should be in a rotation somewhere. But yeah, I just think that things are going to look really different for Jalen Naylor playing with this crew than when he was playing behind Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. So don't really think that you've got like a dominant receiver there to really push the group. And Brock Bowers, for everything that he isn't a wide receiver, right? He's not going to run the same routes, push the same areas of the field. So that's a clear area that I think the Raiders are going to need to get better in, barring some surprise development internally. So we'll see how that shakes out. Flipping over to the defense. Yeah, I had the other huge news of the offseason, right? Between the Linderbaum contract got a lot of love, and that, this Max Crosby no trade was something else. And I guess on that point, can totally understand where the Raiders might have wanted to move on from him. They're, in this kind of reset point, everything like that, acquire more draft capital, those things. Same time, again, it's hard to find good players to pay in the NFL right now. And assuming that this does work out with Fernando Mendoza at quarterback, and the Raiders are kind of on a timeline where maybe this year they're pushing for a 7-9 record next year. They're pushing for the playoffs. Well, it'd be pretty darn good to have a blue chip player at a premium position, and Max Crosby anchoring that defense as the edge. So we'll see how that works out. Besides Max Crosby, it's going to be interesting to see how this defense plays out over the next 2-3 years, I guess you would say. I think that the signings of Quay Walker and Nakobe Dean, reuniting the former Georgia teammates at off ball linebacker, those guys seem pretty likely to be in place for a little bit longer term. And then, up front, you've got rotational players. So you add Kwity Paye to the mix. I don't think that he's necessarily displacing anybody, but, he's not like going to take all the snaps. Still have some rotational players in Jonah Laulu and, Adam Butler who can play some. And similarly on the back end, we can point to some, pretty solid veterans, whether it's Jeremy Chin. Eric Stokes had a little bit better year last year. Isaiah Palomal has played a lot of ball. Can sure bring the bring the hammer when he hits. So that's always a fun part of his game. But the flip side of that is that as I look at this Raiders depth chart, it looks like, on defense at a lot of these positions, they've got a lot of young guys that could wind up filling in the roster as the season goes on. And that's, likely what they're hoping to have happen, because the Raiders picked a defender in rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So, that's a lot of bodies to throw at it. And, not all the draft picks they obviously had quite the treasure trove this year, but, whether it's Traden Stukes, the slot that they drafted in the second round, or Kieran Crawford, who's an edge rusher they drafted in the third round. And then, they got kind of the draft's ultimate wild card in Jermod McCoy, the outside cornerback out of Tennessee, who, so many people said was a top 10 talent, but apparently his knee is just like a huge question mark. So we'll see what happens with those gambles. It's a situation where I think this Raiders defense, if everybody in the current starting lineup were to be healthy going into the year, probably get pretty solid results. It'll be interesting to see what their defensive coordinator, Rob Leonard, is able to do here. I think that there's two ways to look at the hiring of Rob Leonard. Either the Raiders had a hit unearthed gem on their coaching staff at the defensive line, and Kubiak just really liked this guy, and that's obviously one possibility. The flip side of that is that Kubiak was hiring his staff at the end, because he, and the Seahawks went to the Super Bowl, and he wasn't officially announced as the coach until after the fact, right? So, like, you had all the other staffs in the league in place. You already had all the college coaching stuff happen. So it might be a situation where he didn't have like a huge, long list of candidates for the job, and then you end up with Rob Leonard. I can't speak to that. Obviously only the people in the building know about that. But it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out. Won't really know until we get on the grass. I will say on Leonard, he has definitely worked for a number of interesting different influences throughout his career, whether it's, working for Patrick Graham with the Raiders this last little stint. He worked under Brian Flores at one point. So, definitely has a lot of ideas in his background. So it's going to be really cool to see what he wants to emphasize as the defensive coordinator. But we'll have to wait for them to get on the grass in September to know about that. Yeah, but to the point that, I think that the defense could be fine. But at the same time, it's really hard for me to point to anybody outside of Max Crosby and say that, this guy's going to be a difference maker for your defense. I think it'll be on Mad Max, as usual, to set the tone and really roll things for this Raiders defense. And, they'll have to continue to grow. So, but very good chance that we'll see some of these guys kind of get into the lineup as the year goes on. And I guess that could be said for all these rookies on the Raiders, where, Mendoza does not look like he'll necessarily be the day one starter. Maybe our guy Trey Zune, it takes a little bit longer, but I think you'll see all of these rookies start to play their way into the rotation in September. And that all lines up with a team that's in growth mode, right? So, yeah, we'll see how it all shakes out. I guess the one thing I would say when I kind of took a step back and looked at the Raiders, draft class as a whole and kind of that coupled with the offseason decisions, I think that the one argument you can make, and this is kind of a Daniel Jeremiah ism, if you're familiar with DJ from Move the Sticks and his other podcasts, Rockin' 40s and Free Agents these days, he often brings up that with these young quarterbacks, he'd really like to just load up on the offense and get that right. And once you know that you've got that figured out, then we'll go fix the defense. I feel like the Raiders are a team that could have thought about that a lot in this draft. They add Mike Washington, the running back, in the 4th round, which struck me as odd because that's the position on offense that you don't need a roll of the dice at. Like, Ashton Genty is a tremendously talented back, right? Like, we don't need to be going and trying to find 2 tremendously talented backs or find a gem in the 4th round. What we do need to do is find some receivers. And given that, we have outstanding receivers in the NFL come out around anywhere from 2 through 5, even lower. It's not a position like, for instance, offensive tackle. You're probably not finding an all-pro offensive tackle in the fifth round. It is very unlikely. Whereas like Puka Nakua was a fifth round pick, right? So I would have really preferred, I guess, to see them use more of their dice rolls on the offensive pieces rather than trying to get the defense somewhere. Especially, they made so many free agent additions on defense. It's not like you had just like glaring holes where you've got guys who should clearly be backups started penciled into the starting lineup going into the draft. So I thought they could have just, focused a little more on, giving Mendoza a few more weapons, maybe look at getting a tackle prospect in case things don't work out with DJ Glaze long term. Just all those sorts of things. So might have done it differently, but at the same time, I don't have like a problem with the way they went about it. It's just different, and they might get the offense and defense online at different times as a result. So we'll see how that shakes out. That's it for the Raiders. Let's move along. Let's do the Arizona Cardinals next. This is kind of transitioning nicely team to team. We got all these teams with all this money, and then we had the one that added the first overall quarterback or had the first overall quarterback in the Titans, and then we moved to the Raiders who add the first overall quarterback, and now we go from the Raiders who added a superstar running back at the top of the draft and promptly finished dead last in the league. And we'll move on to the Cardinals, who added a superstar running back at the top of the draft here. So, Arizona Cardinals entering 2026. So we've got Mike LaFleur taken over as the head coach. I'm just looking at my notes, and I think I need to update that on the page because I think I might have typed in his brother Matt's name there. A lot of familiar names from Green Bay. So we got Monty Awesomefork remains the GM. He's entering his 4th year in the league. We got Nathaniel Hackett as Mike LaFleur's OC here in Arizona. Oh my gosh, that's going to be tough. Nick Rawlis was retained as the defensive coordinator in Arizona. We'll talk about him as well. And then Michael Gabriel is the special teams coordinator here. So I don't think I mentioned Cardinals have $41 million in cap space entering this year, $148 million entering for 2027, and $417 million open for 2028. Which, like, you talk about the way this is shooting up, it's just crazy amount of money. Have all their draft picks the next 2 years, so kind of all set for a multi-year rebuild on the surface. Now that's kind of right where we'll go with the Cardinals here. Is that you just hired a new head coach in Mike LaFleur, and you should be resetting here. But we'll draw a little bit of a comparison to another team here. The Atlanta Falcons, another team with a big time running back, recently changed head coaches, kept their GM at the time in Terry Fontenot, who has since been fired. And you got the feeling that once Raheem Morris came in, we're kind of restarting with the coach, but the organizational timeline didn't feel like that. The organizational timeline still felt like it was on Fontenot's roster build, and hey, you're going into year 4 and we need to have something here, right? So we need to get out of the gate rather than maybe being realistic about where we are and reassessing this. I get that similar vibe with Arizona here, where Austin Fort is entering his 3rd year at the helm. In theory, he should have been able to build out the roster infrastructure by now, and you should be pushing to commit or to compete. I don't see how you can look at the Arizona roster right now and say that, though. Like, that's a great, what if scenario, and that's obviously what you would have liked to see happen. But, I look at this Arizona roster, and it's just not very good. And so, getting to the big discussion point with drafting Jeremiah Love at running back with that 3rd overall pick. On the positive side, I think that Jeremiah Love has a great chance to win Offensive Rookie of the Year. I think in the best case scenario, we talk about the other, let's just touch on the skill players around him. We've got Trey McBride, who's arguably the best pass-catching tight end in the NFL. We've got Michael Wilson, who emerged as a big-bodied receiver on the outside and really took the next step in terms of productivity last year. He'd always been kind of more of a role player, and with Harrison out of the lineup for some time, he really asserted himself as their top receiver. And then we've still got Marvin Harrison in the mix, who, number 4 overall pick. He's entering his 3rd year. I personally was pretty underwhelmed by his film out of the gate. I think that might be documented, but I thought that he just wasn't explosive enough, right? Just physically not explosive enough, not an explosive enough athlete. Very long, all those things, but he just didn't move the way you need to move to create separation in the NFL. And I thought that had taken a step forward going into year 2. And then all the injuries start to pile up, and it was just, difficult season for him. But I would say that, I'm not out on Marvin Harrison. Relative, I wasn't, thought he was overhyped, but I do think that he's, got length. You can't teach that. And he's good enough. There's enough there to work with that. If he can get 5%, 10% better in an offseason, he could be a really productive receiver. So all that to say, I think that there's a case that in the best case scenario for the Cardinals, that adding Jeremiah Love at running back gives them a top 5 skill group. Now, the problem with that is how is that going to fit into the rest of the roster, right? Because I can point to, we can rewind 2-3 years ago now when Saquon Barkley and Derrick Henry changed teams from the Giants and the Titans to the Eagles and the Ravens, and go from, having questions about where their careers are going at that point to, lapping the league in yards run and posting career best seasons. I can point to, Saquon Barkley getting with the Giants and them winning no games. We can point to Bijan Robinson down with the Atlanta Falcons. And, Bijan Robinson has been a phenomenal player for them. He was fantastic last year. Where did that take the Atlanta Falcons, right? And I can keep going to point to Ashton Genty. I mean, obviously the numbers aren't good, but it's not like Genty got out there and he just couldn't play, right? It's just one of those things where, look, I don't know where you're going to point to a team in the NFL where the running back was really driving the success. And that's not to say that running backs aren't important. I think they are. Every player on the field is an important player. And, if you can get explosive plays from your running back, that's a huge, huge boon in today's NFL. But at the same time, when you're picking in the top 5, there's other positions available to you that you're just not going to find anywhere else. And, again, if there was a long track record of teams taking, running backs to that premium position and building around them, we'd be having a different discussion here, but that's just not what the history is. And, so I kind of look at this Arizona team and, Atlanta, you still won't have a quarterback probably. You take Carson Beck in the 3rd round, which is we'll talk about that in just a moment. But it just feels like the bones of this are not built and the quarterback wasn't there. So I really, think that the way that, you could point to the Jets or the Cleveland Browns, where, they just rolled with it. And maybe the Browns is the better example because they don't even have like a veteran. Geno Smith probably doesn't fit the discussion, but both of those teams really built out the infrastructure around whoever the quarterback is going to be, and the Cardinals instead, you take a running back, and sure that helps to some degree, but we're still left in this position where I think you've got just, a lot of questions about how the rest of the roster is going to come together. So speaking of that, on the offensive line, you got Paris Johnson, who's, solid, above, probably fits in that Colton Miller category as a left tackle you feel pretty comfortable about. They did bring in the veteran Isaac Sumalo to play left guard next to Hate Froholt, who's been very solid for them since Austin Fort brought him over in free agency. And then, they drafted Chase Basantis in the 2nd round there, and hopefully he slots in as the starting right guard ahead of Isaiah Adams. And if that works out, then hey, Isaiah Adams has started a lot of games in the NFL the last 2 years, so that's not a bad player to have as your backup. But where we're left is that, okay, so Elijah Wilkinson's our right tackle, and sure, Wilkinson, he did a good job stepping in for the Falcons after Caleb McGarry went down before the season. But Elijah Wilkinson, in my estimation, is a swing tackle, and I think that his contract that he signed with Arizona reflects that. And the Cardinals might be just fine if Elijah Wilkinson and Paris Johnson are healthy all year this year. But, if they go down, I think the next name up is Oli Udoh. And, I liked Oli as, a swing tackle with the Vikings, but that was several years and multiple jerseys ago. I don't know how comfortable I'd be throwing Oli Udoh out there as my offensive tackle. So, maybe you wouldn't have gotten value with that 3rd overall pick, but explain to me where you're going to find this offensive tackle moving forward. And I think it's just a very difficult question to answer when, you don't know what your assets are going to be moving forward. So, again, this could be, pretty darn good offense if it all clicks. We'll see what happens at quarterback. Apparently, Jacoby Brissett is in a contract impasse with the Cardinals, which makes sense. I mean, if you're not watching the video, I don't think that makes sense at all. That's crazy to me that you're having a contract dispute with a journeyman quarterback who, ended up playing with, no pressure because the defense couldn't stop anyone. So that's, we'll see how that works. But And then Gardner Minshew's on the roster. And then we got Carson Beck, who, let's call it for what it is. It's really unlikely Carson Beck's going to turn out to be a big time NFL quarterback. The guy has the measurables, right? He's 6'4", 6'5". He's, in that 200, 20-pound range, I believe, from what I was looking at. So he's got the size. He has a lot of college production playing for programs like Georgia and Miami as they're going on playoff runs. So this is not a guy who flew under the radar. This is not a guy who fell in the draft because he lacked ideal measurables. This is a guy who fell in the draft because he's put a ton of college tape out there, and it doesn't look like he translates to the NFL. I haven't watched the tape of Beck, but like you can just understand that from the draft profile, because if he was like looking like a viable NFL player, he'd go in the first round. There's just no getting around that. So you just get to that question of, okay, well, if we didn't use the one pick on the guard, but we had three, top 65 picks in this draft. And, if Carson Beck is just a backup, then what were we doing here? Did we really set ourselves up so that in year 2 of the LaFleur era, we're really going to hit the ground running? Or did we put ourselves in a position where we're going to be trying to, fill things in that are hard to find? And I guess that's kind of where I'm at with it. And then flipping over to the defense, as I was looking at this, I think that, injuries impact every NFL team, as I noted in my write-up. But man, in terms of losing, your key guys for a lot of games, they're the first and second round picks that the Cardinals have made in the 2 drafts preceding this one. They had taken Darius Robinson, and of course had 3 picks in the first 2 rounds in this draft I'm referencing, because Marvin Harrison went with their first pick, and then they took Darius Robinson end of the first round, Max Melton in the second round. Last year they take Walter Nolan in the first round, and then Will Johnson, the corner, in the second round. And I actually personally liked what I think of like the best of Max Melton and Will Johnson is the outside cornerback duo in Arizona, but these guys aren't healthy, right? Will Johnson missed multiple games last year, had injury concerns coming out of Michigan. Walter Nolan played 6 games last year. Max Melton missed, the bulk of the back end of the season after showing some pretty promising tape early on. And then Darius Robinson, who missed most of his first year, he was more available last year, but he just wasn't impactful. So I look at this Arizona defense, and like there's some nice names on it. Buda Baker's had a really good career. I don't know if he's quite that same guy, but like, we've got stuff like, Mac Wilson's going to be back as an off-ball linebacker. I don't know how thrilled I am about that, in terms of getting really amped up. We can point to Garrett Williams as like a solid player in the nickel, but there's just not needle movers. And, I think that, they in terms of the moves they made this offseason, they added Roy Lopez as the nose tackle, right? And I just don't really know that that's going to move the needle. Andrew Billings is the other name I want to look up that they threw in there. So really didn't do much to add to a defense that was just horrific down the stretch last year. So, I think that, we'll see what happens. But, if Carson Beck doesn't end up being a guy for them, there's a chance that they go through this offseason and they added, a couple of players on the offense, and maybe they are even more of a fantasy football scam going into next year. But in terms of where is this going to be in 2 years and 3 years, I just think that it's a lot harder to see. So I think that certainly for today, Jeremiah Love makes you better, makes them a much more exciting offense. I can't wait to see this crew work together, and I'm excited to watch the Arizona Cardinals play football in the upcoming year. But I guess that in terms of the longer term outlook under Mike LaFleur, I just wonder, where exactly this is going to go and if it's going to lead to anything. So that's where I'm at on the Cardinals right now. So, a little down on them. But we'll see how this all works out here. And to Austin Fort's credit, probably worth noting that his first 4 draft picks in his first draft were Paris Johnson, who I'd say has worked out. BJ Ojolari has been kind of a flop on the edge. But then you got Michael Wilson and Garrett Williams in the 3rd round. So it's not like Monty Austin Fort can't draft, right? So don't think that need to have a negative opinion of any of his draft picks based on his draft history. It's just kind of looking at those positions and wondering how this is all going to come together on an actual contending roster rather than just a team that's got good players at certain spots. So speaking of how you're going to bring a team together, let's hit the New York Jets here to finish off the show. The Jets, I mean, I was, as you review these teams, so it was just looking at that. And I know that there were some really bad teams like the Raiders we just talked about. I don't know how the Jets weren't picking first. I mean, it was such a dumpster fire last year to come out of that and not be picking first, off a season where, it just didn't seem like they had like a legitimate, coherent plan. We can point to the results at the end of the season of them getting no interceptions, despite the fact that their head coach, his superpower is calling plays on defense. And even with that superpower, he didn't get his team in position to make one interception at the position he played in the NFL. So yeah, I don't know, man. If that's your superpower, what are your normal powers as a head coach? Bad, probably not the best thing for Aaron Glenn to have said. And then the flip side of that is I felt like what happened on their offense last year was really concerning as an organizational thing because you bring in name's slipping me right now, but the young offensive coordinator with you from Detroit, and week one with Justin Fields against the Steelers, it looked interesting, right? I was excited to watch the Jets week two film and see how they were going to build off of what they had shown with Justin Fields in week one to take advantage of his really unique skill set and keep building it. And then you turn on the week two film and it's like, oh, that was it. That was it. Like, you guys don't appear to have a plan to expand on any of this. And like, this isn't going to work. Just like having Justin Fields run this offense with one receiver. And, it was just such a mess. And, I felt like it showed like a total lack of foresight. So, transitioning forward here, you got a Jets team that went on to trade everybody in terms of the quality players in this organization, I guess, except, you can talk about the O-lineman. We will get to some of the positives, but, ship Quinnen Williams and Sauce Gardner, who were parts of arguably the NFL's best defense a couple of years ago. Again, getting back to Aaron Glenn, you've got those guys still in-house, and the defense just completely falls apart. That does not speak well to your acumen running all that. And, so now we're at this position where, okay, hopefully this is just gonna blow up on the launch pad, but it's just like, I don't know, this process of we're gonna trade all our players and have an empty building and we're just gonna add draft picks to it. I think that's been shown to be a pretty hard way to go, whether it's the Miami Dolphins or the Cleveland Browns who have done that in recent history. It's hard to start from the bottom with a rebuild. So, we'll see how this goes with the Jets. Let's just talk about, some of the foundation players on offense where they do have some promise, and then we'll just keep moving. But, so on offense, I think that you can for sure point to Olu Fashanu and Armand Menbu at the offensive tackle position and say, hey, we've got a great pair of bookend tackles. We've got two more years of contract control on Fashanu plus the option, and then, an extra year compared to that with Menbu. So I think that they're in as good a shape of really anybody in the NFL at the offensive tackle position. However, I'm not sure that translates to the whole O-line. Right now, you got, I think that Joe Tippmann's a good right guard entering last year of his contract. Don't think that he's Quentin Nelson. So, it is what it is. And then Josh Myers, I think, is just like the last acceptable center is kind of what the NFL has told you about him, where Green Bay moves on from him. He signs a small contract with the Jets, extended with them, but it's not like he got, Tyler Linderbaum money, so to speak. So I think Josh Myers is a fine player, and hey, Green Bay had some of the best offenses in the NFL with Aaron Rodgers playing quarterback and Josh Myers at center. So it's not like this guy is unplayable. But I wouldn't say he's a needle mover either. And then, if we just look at the Jet situation, looking at left guard where they moved on from John Simpson, and we're gonna see what happens there. But right now Dylan Parham is set to be the starting left guard. He followed Geno Smith over from that debacle with the Raiders, and I would not have been trying to poach the Raiders offensive line if I was trying to upgrade my own in the offseason. So we'll see how it goes. Speaking of Geno Smith, I did have, higher hopes for him in Las Vegas. Certainly, I wrote it this time a year ago that I thought that the Sam Darnold Geno Smith swap was pretty similar. They thought they had more similarities than differences as players. Obviously, ended up at polar ends of the standings with Darnold winning the Super Bowl and Geno Smith picking first. But I do think the players are a little bit closer than that would indicate. So maybe Geno gets it going here. I think that he's always played kind of a turnover prone game. Even his best stuff in Seattle, that was part of it. Obviously went off the rails with the Raiders last year. And we'll see. Maybe it goes a little bit better with Frank Reich as the offensive coordinator here in New York. And certainly he should have better weapons and a better cast around him. We talked about the offensive line. And then, in terms of the pass catchers that they've added, we already had a couple of good players with Garrett Wilson in-house as a quality receiver. And then I think Mason Taylor showed last year he'll be in the league a long time as an inline tight end who can add to your passing game, be a good blocker. They, had 3 first-round picks this year. So after taking Arvell Reese early, they added Kenyon Sadiq, the tight end from Oregon, and then Omar Cooper, the receiver from Indiana, in the first round. So they've added weapons here, and you've got a group around the quarterback. And Gino, I think has a chance to bounce back and have a decent season here. Where that all goes, we'll see. And if Breece Hall can supercharge it, that'd be great. But I do think there's also an alternative there where this offense doesn't come together, and Breece Hall's on the trade deadline by the time we get there. So, the flipping around the other side of this is that so on defense, I mean, the Jets were just horrendous last year, and they're turning the whole roster over and everything like that, and they've sort of, one of the themes has been, we're going to bring in a bunch of veterans to kind of, set a high floor. And we talked about what happened with the Raiders and Pete Carroll earlier on the show. And, this is one more area where the Jets seem to be emulating the Raiders plan from last year, which seems like a really odd choice, whether it's bringing in Geno Smith, bringing in Parham, obviously not paying Geno what the Raiders were paying. But I can just see a lot of ways where this is going to come together that way. And I look at the players that the Jets added on defense, and look, I've been beating the drum for Demario Davis since I started really watching NFL film back at, back part of 2013, getting ready for the 2014 season and moving forward. I mean, so back when Demario was on the Jets, bouncing to the Browns and back, I was a big fan of his, thrilled he got to land in New Orleans and get his shine for so long. This is like 11 years ago now. Like, if I've been watching you this whole time, you're up there. So I think you have to be worried that Demario is just going to have the bottom fall out for him this year, just given his age. And, Minka Fitzpatrick is another guy who, Minka was a blue player, just like Demario Davis, elite player in my book. No question. When he was, starring in Pittsburgh, absolutely love watching the player. That guy doesn't exist anymore. I mean, if you'd added Minka Fitzpatrick in his prime, I can guarantee, I'd say it's a stone cold lock that the Jets break this interceptionless streak with Minka Fitzpatrick in the fold. I don't have that same confidence at all with the current version of Minka Fitzpatrick. We can kind of keep going here. They brought David Onyemata in, who used to be teammates with Demario Davis in New Orleans before he went to Atlanta for 3 years. Onyemata's entering his age. He's going to turn 34 this year. You just don't know. And then the other players they added, it's guys like Joseph Asai, Kingsley Enagbare, and Dane Belton, who I think are all just kind of, the first two are edges. I think rotational edges, kind of your 3-4 rushers, and Dane Belton probably best suited as a versatile backup safety. I don't know. Maybe he plays his way into the starting lineup. And then you add Nashawn Wright, who, he had all the interceptions in Chicago last year, but I think the fact that the Bears were willing to let him go and the contract he signed at, reflects the fact that he was not like a sticky player in coverage or somebody you're trying to stay away from. Obviously, big props to the guy for being Johnny on the ball and making those things happen. But, same time, don't know that, you're really all that optimistic about it. The one move I really did like for this defense, and it's great for them to add David Bailey, the pass rusher from Texas Tech, as something on the edge to bring some heat there. I think, did I say Arvell Reese? Yeah, obviously went David Bailey. He'll play into the mix, but it's just so much to ask for one guy and a rookie at that, who's like kind of a supercharged DPR, to really change the prospects of a defense that's in this bad a shape. Given how last year went and locker room culture, not seeming to be so great under Aaron Glenn there. And, so we'll see. The one move I did like is the trade for Tavondre Sweat. For all the flack he gets about character and everything like that, I thought Tavondre Sweat's tape on some horrendous Titans defenses the last 2 years was pretty darn good when he was out there. I enjoyed watching him next to Jeffrey Simmons. So I think picking up the last 2 years of Tavondre Sweat's rookie contract, that's an appealing asset to acquire, especially if you just didn't want Jermaine Johnson in the building. So, I'd say that's positive, but I guess that in terms of looking at this team as a whole and the whole culture, I don't hate the roster by any means. In fact, if you were to put this roster down in Atlanta under Kevin Stefanski and his coaching staff in, what I think is a relatively weak NFC South, I think that this squad would have a chance to compete for the division title. But that relies on the idea that the coaching staff is going to get the absolute max out of the group and maybe more than you can imagine. And I have no faith in Aaron Glenn's ability to do that after last year. And then you're bringing in Frank Reich to take over the offense after I don't think Stanford won very many football games last year, and Reich's last two stops in the NFL as an offensive coordinator, whether it was in Carolina or in Indianapolis, went really, really poorly. So, the NFL is a crazy league. Stuff could happen, but I think that the most likely scenario for this Jets team is that they're just bad again. And, hopefully they do get the number one pick. 'Cause that's probably the best case scenario for this organization is getting a new quarterback to work with moving forward. Give yourself another year to build out the roster around him. And hopefully these players are more mature, everything like that, so that when we're sitting here next offseason, we're talking about the Jets' new quarterback stepping into a situation where, hey, I've got these great offensive tackles. We established several pass catching options. We had Garrett Wilson was back healthy. Kenyon Sadiq had a good year. We got Omar Cooper now. I think that could all play that way, but in terms of like the likelihood I would place on that, I'd say pretty darn low given the guys who are running the operation, which is unfortunate. And yeah, I guess it's just like one last thought to the organization as a whole. Like, I like David Bailey with that second overall pick. I think that you had a lot of players that you could have liked there. I have never seen I guess it's D'Angelo Pons, who's the 5'9", 180 corner out of Indiana, who they took. I haven't seen his tape. I don't do college tape, so maybe he's a great player. But in terms of the actual profile, it's confusing to me. I don't understand, unless he's going to be able to hang on the outside. I don't understand using a pick in the middle of the second round. I think it's the 50th pick on a 5'9", 180-pound slot corner when the rest of the league is going in the opposite direction towards bigger players there. And in the same draft where a bunch of offenses, I mean, how many tight ends went off the board, right? Like any offense that wasn't comfortable playing 12 or 13 personnel last year, they're going to be comfortable with that this year. So I thought that was a bizarre way to zag while the rest of the league is zigging. Maybe Pons is just a phenomenal player. He can hang on the outside. Maybe he's just so nasty he can live in the slot and make that work. But if he is just a slot only cornerback and he's going to have to play in sub packages against only certain personnel groupings, that's just an odd profile for the 50th overall pick. So again, maybe Pons is just going to, exceed expectations there, but I don't know. Like, it just struck me as really small player to be adding with a premium pick there when there were certainly other things that you could be doing as an organization. So we'll see how it goes. Obviously, Aaron Glenn fired damn near his whole coaching staff after the first year. That doesn't portend well for the future. So we'll see how it all shakes out. But anyways, yeah, that's it for the 4-13 teams. Again, apologies for the technical glitch there and having this in 2 episodes, but hey, got to get through the work at some point, and I got to hop onto code here and get the repository going to the next stage for the rest of the day's tasks. So hope that you all enjoyed this rundown. I certainly love talking football. So we got the 4-13 teams with the combined $1 billion in cap space in the next 3 years out of the way. And we'll start to move into some teams that have a few more things put together in episodes to come. If you like the show, hey, subscribe. Appreciate anything to support the work. Follow along. And yeah, I'll be back next weekend with another podcast, and I'll be throwing up articles on teams 5, 6, 7, and 8 throughout the week. Until next time, have a good one, everyone.